So, I bought Baldur's Gate 3 on release day, something I've never done before, because I love party-based RPGs and I couldn't for the life of me remember the last time there was so much hype for one. But I couldn't finish it. I'm going to explain why, but because I'm about to take a bite out of what's rapidly becoming something of a sacred cow, I want to make a few things clear right up top. Number 1. I do not hate Baldur's Gate 3, nor do I think it's a bad game. I only got to the end of Act 1 for a reason I'll explain throughout this video, but I enjoyed playing around with the deep gameplay systems and seeing the sheer amount of love and effort that Larian put into bringing Faerun to life. Speaking of which, I do not hate Larian. I immensely appreciate how they're helping revitalize party-based CRPGs and how they've shown that releasing a finished product is still possible in 2023. Not only that, but I've sunk about 200 hours into Divinity Original Sin 2 across solo and co-op campaigns. They're a decent company that makes good games. Now that I've gotten my caveats out of the way, it's time that I tell you about my main problem with Baldur's Gate 3. The thing is, even though I mentioned how grateful I am to Larian for putting this type of game back into the limelight, throughout my measly 20 hours, I was constantly wondering, where's the party? Well, the gameplay mechanics of Baldur's Gate 3 revolve around controlling, coordinating, and developing a consistent cast of characters. It doesn't really feel like a party-based RPG in a narrative sense. At least, not a very good one, because Baldur's Gate 3 commits 3 cardinal sins in setting up the party dynamics. The first and perhaps most grievous of these sins is that there's a huge disconnect between the early plot and the companion quests. Let's start by breaking down the setup to Baldur's Gate 3. 1. Weird-looking cephalopod fellas kidnap you and implant you with a parasite. 2. This parasite will turn you into a cephalopod after a week or so, and while it seems like most players really want to fuck a squid, less want to be one. Yeah. Anyways, so you escape and go looking for someone to remove the parasite with other infected people. These are your party members, and as is customary with party-based RPGs, they each come with their own questline and character arc. And that's how Baldur's Gate 3 begins. It plays on your deep-seated fear of becoming squid, which is great, but the issue here is that outside of Shadowheart and Lae'zel, which is a caveat that will come up a lot by the way, none of the core companion questlines overlap with the parasite drama. Astarion is a vampire and craves blood. Will is in debt to a deceitful demon. Karlach's heart is going to explode. And Gale's heart is going to explode. It's good that these are all at least urgent problems, but at the same time, helping your buddies out here can feel like an exhausting distraction. Because when you're running across the Sword Coast trying to find infernal iron for Karlach, you have to wonder, why bother doing all these things for someone my character barely knows, when I have 4 to 5 other skilled fighters in camp, and a soon-to-be fatal parasite worming around in my head? Of course, Karlach's voice actress did too good a job for me to just let her die, so I ran around looking for the iron anyways. But that didn't stop me from also wondering, how did the Mind Flayers just happen to abduct all these people with absurdly dangerous and dramatic issues? Which leads to my next gripe with the way this party is set up. How did the Mind Flayers just happen to abduct all these people with absurdly dangerous and dramatic issues? The intro cutscene establishes that the Mind Flayers abduct huge amounts of people seemingly at random. So how is it that these 6 people ended up on the same ship at the same time? Well, it's not necessarily a plot hole that this convenient party just happened to come together on the Nautiloid. They have no organic reason to fight together. Their individual motives and desires don't overlap, and because of that, there is no interesting drama or conflict between them, again, with the exception of Lae'zel and Shadowheart. They've come together because the Mind Flayers just happened to abduct them all, which is only a shade better than if there was a title crawl that said, "Hey, this is Larian speaking. We just thought it'd be cool if a cultist, a Klingon, a vampire, a snarky bomb, a hyperactive bomb, and this guy went on an adventure." And you know what? That does sound pretty cool. For maybe a few hours. But these people have to have some kind of interplay to sustain a narrative of over 100 hours. And that group dynamic either isn't there or feels banal and contrived. The few party banters that I experienced were mostly just there to ramp up the game's already extreme horniness. Even Karlak and Will, who could have talked to each other about their parallel experiences with devils and the hells, they'd only ever talk about one another to my character. And why should they do that? Why should my character even lead this party? Which brings me to my last issue with the party setup. Every party-based RPG has a leader, and it's always the player character. That being said, most CRPGs I've played have an in-game reason as to why that's the case. There is no such reason in Baldur's Gate 3. All the characters are equally capable and equally infected, so why does everyone just default to following you, right from the get-go? The hands of the developers manipulating the world and its characters are visible again here, which makes being a part of this party less interesting because your power is absolute and your responsibilities ill-defined. To sum it all up, while the individual members seemed interesting enough, this wasn't the virtual group I wanted to spend my few free hours with after getting home from work or class, especially when there were other parties I could join. In fact, I'm going to do a lightning round run-through of a few examples of these parties to show what a good setup looks like. Ready? And go! Starting off, Dragon Age Origins. Dick riding Dragon Age Origins is a favorite hobby of mine. Its party is phenomenal, and I'm going to talk about it. Your character leads this bunch of whack jobs because they are a Grey Warden. The goal of the party is to stop the Darkspawn Blight, and stopping blights is what Grey Wardens do. As such, the others defer to your direction most of the time, though they each have their own red lines which will cause them to disobey you should you cross them. Meanwhile, each character has their own reason for helping the Grey Warden to stop the Blight. While their personal quests may not always intersect directly with this objective, their emotional arcs most definitely do. What I mean to say is that the main quest line is an integral part of the companion's journey rather than an inconvenient distraction from their real problems. Sten is a killer who wants to atone for his sins and be of use to the Qun. Wynne wants to make use of her dwindling life force by going on one last adventure. And Liliana goes with the Warden because she thinks that's the Maker's will for her. Etc., etc. I can't think of anything for Oghren, but fuck him anyway. The strong and sometimes disparate motivations that drive each companion lead to frequent banter, fleshing out characters and the world, while also explaining why this party of dangerous and unstable individuals travels together. Mass Effect 2. ME2 might seem like a weird example here, because it has some of the same flaws that I attribute to Baldur's Gate 3. The personal problems of the Normandy crew aren't directly related to the Collector threat, while the crew members have little to do with each other. In fact, the game has almost nothing in the way of party banter. Yet these flaws are turned into strengths because of the game's unconventional approach to party building, and because of the ingenious design of the final sequence suicide mission. Rather than having the companions join Shepard by choice or by happenstance, Shepard actively seeks out each of them so that they might fulfill a specific role in taking down the Collector base. Members of the crew might not get along, talk to one another, or even be likable, but they're all specialists and essential to the mission. In Mass Effect 2, you never have to wonder why it's these people in particular that you're spending your time with, while doing their companion quests is less of a chore than it is a way to ensure their full investment in a mission that doesn't concern them personally. Trails of Cold Steel. Finally, just to prove I've played a party-based RPG that isn't a BioWare creation, I'll touch on how Falcom goes about making Class 7 a group that you want to be a part of in the first Trails of Cold Steel game. For one thing, even though the game doesn't have companion quests per se, I'd argue that the interwoven stories of the class members actually form the main plot of the game. While there's a mystery conspiracy storyline that runs throughout, the vast majority of your time in Cold Steel 1 is spent on field studies with your classmates as you go to locations across Erebonia, visiting the places and people that are important to each student. Again, helping out your party members here feels like the point of the plot, rather than a distraction from it. Meanwhile, Class 7 is an example of both top-down and bottom-up party construction. The students all come to Thors willingly enough, though the 9 students of Class 7 are chosen by Crown Prince Olivert as an experiment, combining outstanding members of Erebonia's separate social classes to see if they can work together. Your character, Reen, becomes their unofficial leader due to his mixed commoner/noble status, talents for command, and his self-loathing. I mean humility. Well, now that I've gone through those examples, so what? As I said up top, I don't think Baldur's Gate 3 is a bad game, and while I stand by my opinion that the party dynamics aren't great, there were other aspects of the game that very much were. I also think that a lot of issues I've talked about here can be chalked up to the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 is also a co-op game. For example, it would be hard to make the player the clear party leader in the story if there may well be another player with them. So here's what I'll do. I'll try find some real friends who will get Baldur's Gate 3 and play it with me. If I accomplish this great feat, I'll get to see the rest of the game and come back with more opinions. Until then, I'll play the other games I talked about here and hang out with those other parties. Bye for now.